Oh yeah, here we go. Cyberpunk 2077 is about to be released. I've waited 8 years for this, and I get to play it at 7 p.m. EST? Hell yeah. Wait a second. What is this? Hold off the Sony store. What? Buggy mess? CD Projekt Red stock has dropped. Wait, they're getting a lawsuit? What the hell? What's going on over there? What? No, this can't be. This can't be. Cyberpunk 2077, a game which shall live in infamy, was a game so hyped up that expectations for it had skyrocketed to ridiculous levels. Expectations were so high, in fact, that at first glance it would seem the game had become the end-all be-all for many gamers. And quite frankly, who could blame them? CD Projekt Red did a fantastic job at presenting this game. The game itself had been touted as something straight out of our dreams that would revolutionize the gaming industry. And unfortunately, how many times have we heard this in the last decade of gaming? Companies have promised this exact same thing, and few, if any, have ever come close to meeting those promises. Now sadly, the reality thus far has been much worse for CD Projekt Red. Cyberpunk's release will forever be known as one of the worst launches in gaming history, despite 13 million copies sold after all, with the numerous bugs that have thus far been extensively covered, to include copies of the game on PS4 and Xbox One not even functioning. And let's not forget about the missing features that have oddly been discussed at a seemingly surface level. More on that later. Promises have been broken and expectations have been shattered, and honestly, not in a good way. Now, not too long ago, many of us remember the disastrous launch that was Fallout 76. While I'm not sure I would say this is at the same level of bad as Bethesda's launch of Fallout 76, the launch of Cyberpunk, well, it's certainly at least on par with that disaster. At this point, we already know what has happened, but why did Cyberpunk get to this point? And how can CD Projekt Red move forward from this? You might be asking these questions yourself, so let's take our own deep dive into why Cyberpunk 2077 has been such a disaster. Before really diving into this particular subject, I want to ensure everyone that I have done my absolute best to avoid spoilers for those who haven't finished the game. Additionally, this video is not a review of the game itself. It's not meant to be a review at all. While I will mention some parts of the game, particularly the problems that have made this a disastrous launch, I am neither recommending nor not recommending anyone get the game, or for that matter, even assigning a review score. That being said, let's press on. After its announcement in May 2012, Cyberpunk would remain in limbo for about 3 years, despite having a teaser trailer released for it in January 2013. Now, CD Projekt Red also managed to get Mike Pondsmith on board as a consultant for the incoming development process. For those of you who don't know who he is the creator of the original 1988 Cyberpunk pen and paper RPG. He's also the one who greenlit Cyberpunk becoming its own video game. Now, development, or in fact pre-production, did not officially start until 2016 when The Witcher 3 DLC, Blood and Wine, was released. As a note here, CD Projekt Red experienced tremendous success with The Witcher trilogy, which would even lead to the creation of the Witcher TV series, released in December 2019. Now, I hold The Witcher trilogy dear to my heart. I still to this day play those games. Now, as of the most recent statistics I could find, The Witcher games themselves have sold an awe-inspiring 50 million copies as of May 2020. That number is surely higher now, with The Witcher 3 itself having sold about 28 million of the complete 50. CD Projekt Red up to this point has been living the dream. I personally have been a pretty big fan of their company since I played the original Witcher game back in, I think, 2008-2009. Now, for Cyberpunk, they massively expanded their studio after the release of The Witcher 3, and even received financial aid of about $7 million from the Polish government in 2017, aiding the development of their latest game. They held numerous events to hype Cyberpunk, including an event that led to Keanu Reeves, the man, the myth, the legend himself, appearing at the Xbox E3 event in 2019. Promises of the most breathtaking game in history were being established right before our eyes. Dynamic AI, unique quests that are not copy-pasted like your average Ubisoft game, in-depth RPG mechanics, the most believable city in any open world title to date, and a game so stable it would make Bethesda or even Bohemia Interactive cry. I myself was enthralled by the prospect of a truly wondrous modern RPG title that fulfilled my desires of carving out a name for myself in a dystopian future. We got multiple gameplay previews and tons of insight into the game from the developers through interviews and articles. Information on what Cyberpunk was to be came in droves on the interweb. The game even got its own monthly event leading up to its release called Night City Wire that added more hype to an arguably overhyped game. Now, prior to release, we even got some gameplay footage about 1 to 2 weeks beforehand for both the PS4 and Xbox One that I personally believe showed some cracks in the game that the game was not ready to be released. With all that being said, the game was actually being treated, by some, in the great words of the moist critical himself, as the second coming of Jesus. So Cyberpunk finally released, but in an awful state. We know this already. Many of us were introduced to not only a buggy mess of a game, but also a game that came with a world that feels very dead upon exploration. Some aspects of the game felt underutilized or non-existent, such as police AI. It's one of the most notorious problems in the game, appearing out of thin air, no matter where you are when committing a crime. Now, I understand Reddit isn't the most respected of places, but some Redditors actually took it upon themselves to find missing features that I am surprised that few people are talking about. The game isn't just buggy, it is honestly not what was promised in its entirety. Now, I'd love to go over each missing feature, but this is not what this video is about, and just from a quick glance, it would take too long to go over each one. On top of the game not meeting expectations, CD Projekt founders lost $1 billion in less than a week after launch, despite CD Projekt Red also earning a ridiculous amount of money off of the game and breaking records for most concurrent players on Steam at one single time. Currently, there are even discussions and plans underway to establish a lawsuit against CD Projekt Red centered around false advertising and misleading reports, adding yet another blow to CD Projekt Red's image. On a somewhat unrelated but still relevant note, the game Devotion was removed from the GOG store during this time, a game that came under fire from supporters of the Chinese Communist Party for reference to a meme in the game about the General Secretary of China looking like Winnie the Pooh. CD Projekt Red provided no evidence of what gamers messaged them about this content being offensive within the game itself, nor what was considered offensive, meaning whether or not the meme reference was still there, leading to differing speculations about why Devotion was removed from GOG to include pandering to a new marketplace. This may be unrelated in our discussion, and some of this is merely speculation, but certainly has helped amplify this disaster. Sony also pulled Cyberpunk from its online store and has offered refunds to all who purchased a copy digitally. This move is unprecedented given how Sony's refund policy has been criticized historically. Both Microsoft and Sony believe the game will be fixed and ready, with CD Projekt Red seemingly admitting that they mistakenly misled both companies prior to release of the game. In my opinion, things are pretty bad. Now, fortunately from the time of this recording, I have not seen anything worse happen as of yet. The game is getting fixed, which is a good thing. However, it is entirely possible that the storm hasn't faded just yet, and there might be some hard times for CD Projekt Red incoming. In the end, a lot of this disaster ended up being due to multiple factors. The hype that was generated by phenomenal marketing on CD Projekt Red's part was great in getting the gaming industry's attention. But it is my belief that ultimately poor management and leadership between CD Projekt Red's leaders and developers resulted in a buggy game that failed to meet already overhyped expectations. Now, with Christmas and New Year's around the corner, shareholders as well as the board of directors became impatient, wanting a quick cash-in that led to a disaster that will be remembered for years to come. In any scenario, it is my belief that when such disconnect exists between management up the chain and the development teams down the chain, disaster can and most likely will follow. History has a bad habit of repeating itself, and with the gaming industry, they don't have an exception for this. I believe impatience and a lack of clear communication clearly played a part here as well. Rushing any product to release is never a good idea.
I have seen little reason to not believe there was also a disconnect between CD Projekt Red's marketing team and their development team as well. We have seen examples of this with Fallout 76, No Man's Sky, Mass Effect Andromeda. The list goes on. It doesn't matter if a vocal minority of the community or if the shareholders become rabid and demand the game be released. It is better to at least have a finished and working game that meets expectations than an unfinished broken one meeting few or no expectations. Of course, I don't mean to indicate that they should have taken even longer to finish the game. After all, deadlines must be set, or the game possibly could have faded into memory and had a weaker release. To add insult to injury, I remember clearly in the fall of 2019, CD Projekt Red saying that the game was mostly ready and only needed further polishing. What polishing was needed during that time, I don't think we will know anytime soon, but one thing is certain. The game was never ready for release in April. It wasn't ready to be released in September nor November, and it certainly wasn't ready to be released just a few weeks ago. 8 years ago, I remember seeing the announcement about Cyberpunk and being optimistic we would receive a legendary game. After all, I absolutely loved the original Witcher game and The Witcher 2 Assassins of Kings that were both released before the announcement of Cyberpunk even came about. The Witcher 3 would also release a few years later, and to this day, it holds the most hours I've ever spent inside of any RPG. Hell, I enjoyed Skyrim and Oblivion, but didn't put as many hours into those titles as I did The Witcher 3. Sadly for myself and many others, Cyberpunk was far from legendary, and while I have no doubt CD Projekt Red will bounce back from this and right some of these wrongs, what's next? Well, CD Projekt Red has a long way to go to restore its community image, which could be done in a few ways. First and foremost, and most obvious, is fixing Cyberpunk as quickly as possible. It is criminal to let such great characters and storylines become hidden away by bugs. There are plenty of aspects I enjoy about Cyberpunk that are overshadowed by those bugs as well. The game has huge potential, but potential in and of itself does not make a good game. CD Projekt Red needs to do everything in its power to avoid becoming the very thing it sought to stand against. That being a scummy corporation that releases games devoid of any heart, soul, or character. I truly think they can avoid that, but as of this recording, I think they have a long road ahead of them. They could also issue some sort of reward to their fans and the community for supporting them through this time, as well as to make amends for their mistakes. Now, I understand this might not be the most intuitive thing for them to do, but it certainly would help them recover a little bit more quickly than if they didn't. On top of this, if they could create top-notch quality DLC for Cyberpunk's possible future expansions that are on par with Witcher 3's Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine, this would also help immensely. Of course, I imagine there are more ways to go about this that might be effective, but these are just a couple of suggestions, and CD Projekt Red will need to work on recovering its image in many of its fans' eyes. I won't dive into any further speculation for the future, so I think this pretty much covers all that I had for you today. All in all, while I still have a good amount of time to put into Cyberpunk before I complete all 100% of the content, I do find it difficult to play at times. Bugs, glitches, missed opportunities, and a world that just feels lifeless during exploration are really holding back the game that I believe otherwise has huge potential and should be awesome. At the end of the day, this is not a review, and it's just an insight into the game's release and why the release was such a disaster. The CD Projekt Red can and honestly, in my opinion, will recover. They're already doing phenomenally on the sales side of the game. But the pessimistic side of me is also worried they are starting to turn down to the dark side. Only time will tell what will happen. That's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Comment down below and let me know your thoughts on this topic. If you enjoyed the content, feel free to subscribe for more content like this in the near future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on the battlefield.